Alrighty. Hello, everyone. My name is Kenya Wilson, and I currently serve as the current director on the Fort Worth HR Board of Directors as the Director of Emerging Professionals. I would like to welcome you today to our second session in our Investing in You career series, which is Job Search and Resume Essentials, presented to you by Brian Hinchcliffe, who is a senior consultant with Keystone Partners. I'm very excited to share this session with you today. But before we get started in the session, I would like to also mention some of the upcoming events that we have with Fort Worth HR. Next Thursday, we will have a session on June 23rd titled Interview Skills for Success. And that is going to be on June 23rd of 2022, presented to you by David DeNiro. Also in Fort Worth HR, we have other events coming up, which is we have a professional, I believe we have a conference coming up as well. In addition to the career series on June 30th, our last session of the career series will be networking for success. And then I will let you know what our other events are at the end of the session as we close out. I want to go ahead for the sake of time and allow Brian his time to speak to you about job searching and interviewing skills. He has a lot of experience in outplacement, career coaching, recruiting, staffing, as well as talent and organizational development. So Brian, I will turn over the session to you. Thank you for joining us today to share your expertise to our participants who are here with us today.
Thank you very much, Kenya. And by way of introduction, this is what an Australian sounds like after 22 years in Texas. So I don't know what it sounds like, but that's me. Welcome, and I'm looking forward to working through the material here. This is really important stuff, I think, to understand the best ways to make the most of your job search and to find the right job and to find it as quick as you can. A little bit of housekeeping. I understand that all the microphones are muted. So ignore that first point, but we're certainly encouraging you to ask questions using chat, and would encourage you to have your resume available for reference and have a paper and pen to take some notes. But there is a recording, I believe, that will be available after the session. Essentially, I'm going to try to work through a lot of material in a short period of time to help you to develop an effective job search, including a powerful resume. And it's geared towards both emerging professionals who are just starting out their careers in HR, as well as to HR professionals who have experience but are looking perhaps for a new role or looking to pivot to a new industry, perhaps. So I'm perhaps through the chat, if it makes sense, you can indicate whether you're in the first category, the second category, and if you're not in neither of those, put down number 3, and we'll see what we get. Oh, there's a few people there. What do we find, Jim? Still going, are they? Is there a trend?
Seeing a lot of 3s.
A lot of 3s. Okay. Well, maybe we haven't got time to really get into that, but maybe it'd be interesting to know what that 3 looks like. Okay. Thank you, folks, for that. So a little bit of an agenda. Essentially what I'm going to cover are some basic principles for an effective resume. I'm going to touch on the applicant tracking system, process, but I'm guessing that you guys are pretty familiar with what an ATS is and how it works, but nevertheless, sometimes it's worth stating. Now, I'm going to touch on networking as an effective way to to get that job by finding information, getting advice, and getting referrals and recommendations. Let's start with the resume. We have this concept of the basic principles of resume. It needs to be brief, just a couple of pages. It certainly needs to be accomplishment-based, not a list of tasks, but a list of results that you've accomplished. Simple, clear layout that has impact, is easily skim-read and absorbed in just a few seconds, and obviously correct grammar and spelling. So, the anatomy of a resume. Up the top, we start with the header, and obvious things, you want to have your name there. Just a tip, don't put it in a header, in a word header, because it will not be read by the applicant tracking system. So you may have a brilliant resume and nobody will know who owns it. So make sure it's in the body of the document, but your name, no need for a street address, but show where you are, Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, and your zip code, phone, email, and LinkedIn URL, customized. Your summary is really where you position yourself in the marketplace. This is the important stuff that people need to know about you. Whatever is in that summary needs to be supported with evidence under experience, and then finally wrapped up with education and other things at the bottom of the resume. Best size font for a resume is going to be 10.5 or 11 point, typically Times New Roman, Arial, Calibri, but nice and simple and nicely set out. So let's start with the resume summary. This is really your branding statement. What do I do? And here's an example. Certified project manager with experience managing projects for global cross-functional teams in the financial services industry. Tells the story. You may want to modify the job title according to the position that you're applying for. That will help with your optimizing your resume for that job. Secondly, what matters to you? This is your expertise, the things that people know about you, what you're known for. And frame it in those terms. That way you're not bragging about yourself, but this is things that are demonstrable, will be supported by people that know you, and you don't have to feel that you need to brag upon yourself. The summary is going to look something like this. Notice that there is no objective statement. The objective statement is basically your primary label. That's what you're looking to do. It's a combination of level and function. So you might be a global HR professional. You could be a chief human resources officer. You could be at the director level, an HR executive, an HR manager. Something that gives an idea in broad terms of the type of role and the level. And then any secondary labels that might apply to you. Things that you're, you can also list the things that you're experienced in, your areas of expertise, if you will. And we generally suggest a couple of different ways to lay out the competencies below that, either as full-blown couple of line statements about each competency, or a summary of that skill or competency or expertise in bullet point form. Bear in mind all the time you're trying to make this a document easily read, easily skimmed, because people don't spend a lot of time looking at resumes. They want to quickly identify whether you're going in the yes pile or the no pile. So you want to be in the yes, you want to be in the yes pile for further consideration, not in the no pile. A lot of words are overused, and here's just a sample of them. So have a look at your resume now and look and see, do I have some of these words? And I think the problem with them is they become cliches, and cliches, we think we understand what people read into that, but we don't always know. And if it's a word, do we need to say that I'm a hard worker? Is anybody going to hire somebody that's not a hard worker? So do you need to call that out? It's assumed. Think outside the box as an example. What does that really mean? It means that you're somebody that's known for innovation or creativity. Responsible, the word responsible. Use an action verb instead. Say that you managed a team, you led a group, you delivered results, you spearheaded a project, you drove a achievement of results. So try to avoid those cliches. Okay, there's a basis to that, but think about, well, what am I trying to say with that cliche? What is it that I really mean? Can you find different words that will grab attention because they're a little unusual, that show what's unique about you rather than just sounding like a lot of other people? So let's have a look. This is a little pop quiz. Here on the left-hand side, you'll see an example of a statement from a resume summary. Manager with 25 years of experience providing expertise and strategy across key business units within the organization. Just indicate with the word strong or weak whether you think this is a strong statement or a weak one. And Jim's going to keep a track on the chat, and we'll see what we can conclude. Anybody want to contribute to the chat there?
I think Brian was seeing a lot of people's indicating that it's weak
Okay.
and vague. I would, yep, I would probably say that's true too. To be more impactful, I think.
So, sorry, Jim, what did you say? What's the consensus? Is it a weak statement?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are saying it's weak.
Right. And I would agree with that. Years of experience, does that really tell us anything? Is it 1 year's experience repeated 25 times, or is it 25 years of growth? The number of years is far less important than the content of what you write there. So let's try another one. Now, obviously, this is not an HR related one, but you get the idea. Software engineer, back-end developer who mitigates risk to ensure security when designing and implementing enterprise software applications. Is that strong or weak? Let's hear from you in the chat.
Seems like the consensus so far says it's strong or stronger at least.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Stronger because you know, there's never a perfect resume. I've never seen one in thousands that I've worked on. It's just, is it strong? Is it? Yeah. You can always find things to change, but this we would consider a stronger statement, strong statement. It says who they are. It talks about the value they bring and their strengths and how they go about doing things. So it's
Brian,
yeah.
we have a question in the chat from Natasha saying, what are your thoughts on adding years of experience? Seems like.
I just, for me, when I see that in a resume, I tend to replace it with a word like, maybe it's diverse experience across a range of industries, or if it's focused on a particular industry, I might say it's extensive and deep experience. I just don't, personally, I'm not a fan of the number of years of it. I know there are a lot of job descriptions will ask for X years of experience. To me, that's just a way of indicating that they're looking for somebody with more or less experience. But the number of years to me is not critical. But I may be in the minority there.
I guess on that note, Brian, can you talk a little bit about ageism? Because I think there's sometimes a bias that if you have too many years of experience, people think, you know, you might be too old.
Yeah, exactly. Well, ageism certainly does exist, but I think I also, and I've written an article on this in my LinkedIn profile that indicates that I think older people sometimes are their own worst enemy. Why telegraph the number of years of experience? We're really going to focus on the most recent 10 to 15 years of experience. So if you've got 35 years of experience, why call that out? That's not what anybody's looking for, I would suggest. So focus on the value of the experience that you've had, particularly in the last few years, and focus on that instead. That's just what, I mean, the thing that we have when we're older is hopefully diversity of experience. So that's what we want to trade on, not the number of years. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I just want to get your thoughts on it because it's real ageism,
Yeah, and so one of the things I'll suggest you do with the resume, if you have got experience that goes back to, like mine, to last century, is leave off dates of graduation, compress the early experience without dates and detail. That will keep your resume shorter, to 2 pages perhaps. So just focus on the last 10 to 15 years and the prior experience, compress that without dates and without detail. And that will help they can always ask you about that, but you're not telegraphing how old that is or how far back that goes. Okay. So speaking of experience, here's sort of an outline or an overview of how you might show that experience. I think it's important to have a little one or two line description of the company. People don't always know that company that you work for. So just you can drop the flowery marketing language, but just give an idea of how big that company was and the scope of what it did, whether it was global, whether it was local, whether it was regional, how big it was in terms of dollars of revenue and so forth. And then under your position title, that little paragraph starting reported to, that's really the scope statement. That gives an idea of how big that job was. And if you reported to the CEO, that may mean more than if you reported to the head of talent acquisition. But also, how did you get to be in that position? Were you promoted into that job, or were you headhunted for that job or selected for the job? You might want to mention that as well. And give an idea of whether, if you managed a team, how big the team was, how geographically dispersed they were, and the range of functions that they covered. And then the most important part are the bullet points underneath. These are the accomplishment statements. They describe not just the tasks that you were asked to perform, but really what you were faced with, what you did, and the result that you achieved. So specifically, what did you do? Give examples and use action verbs. So here are some examples of impactful action verbs. You notice none of these phrases start with responsible for. To me, that's job description language. That tells me what they wanted you to do. But I'm more interested in, if I'm a recruiter, I'm more interested in what did you actually accomplish? What did you actually achieve? So have a look at some of those and see if there are phrases, action verbs there that you could use to add variety to what you've got on your resume, but also to unlock some of the impact of what you did. Any questions about that in the chat, perhaps?
No questions so far, Brian.
Okay, well, as we go on, we're getting towards the end of the the resume piece, but we'll have some time for people to ask their questions. So here's what I was just talking about, the accomplishment statement. You may well have come across the acronym STAR, S-T-A-R, situation, task, action, result. There are several others, PAR, problem, action, result, or CAR, challenge, action, result. But in each case, it's talking about this, what was it you were charged with doing? So show that with an action verb, and then show the result. Don't talk so much about the how you got there. That's what you want them to ask when they get you to the interview. They see the situation you were faced with, they see the result you achieved, and the question that should be generated for the interview will be, oh, that's a great result. We'd love to get that result in our company. How did you do that? And that's the bit you want to hold back so that there's a reason for them to want to talk to you. So this is what I so often see on people's resumes, a series of basically job duty statements, starting with responsible for. Okay, that tells me what they wanted you to do. But it doesn't tell me a lot. It only tells part of the story, and it doesn't do justice to you and what you actually achieved. So maybe this is better. Instead of responsible for designing and delivering training programs, look at how this gives so much more information and is so much more compelling. It's telling a true story rather than just listing a series of duties. So it starts with that action verbs, past tense, designed and delivered. What types of programs? So safety programs. How extensive were they? They were for over 600 manufacturing employees. And what did they do? they decrease safety incidents by 5%. And if you've been in manufacturing, a decrease of 5% in safety incidents can be a very marked achievement that more so than you might realize. So I would, if you make any change at all to your resume, I would encourage you to look at those responsible for statements and see if you can ask yourself, so what? Why am I mentioning that? What was significant about what I did? And turn those into actual accomplishments, true stories of what you did and the impact that it had. Finally, we get to the end of the resume where you'll have things like education, you'll have professional development, certifications, affiliations, community involvement, military service, volunteer positions, if they're significant. I've seen people with patents, with publications. Sometimes they're so extensive that they hold those as a separate addendum or attachment that they send later on. Maybe a little bit about personal interests, but obviously in this day and age, nothing about date of birth, marital status, any of that sort of stuff.
Hey, Brian, we got a question from the audience. Laura had a question about ageism. What if you were with one company for an extended period of time and then decide to go on a career change?
Right.
How would you reflect that, I guess?
Well, that can be a tricky one, but it's always achievable. During that time with that company, sometimes people have been in exactly the same job for that whole 20 years. More often than not, though, they've had several jobs during that time. So I would certainly break out the experience under the job headings to show that you were your entry-level position was this, but then you were promoted into a team leadership position, and then beyond that were promoted into a manager or executive position. So do show the progression. You've got the issue of how many years do you show in. Perhaps some of that early experience, you might compress that without dates and detail and just put the dates that you worked in the individual jobs up later than that. I hope that answers the question, but it's one that you need to think through, get some advice from your trusted advisors on how they would handle that. You certainly don't want to appear evasive, but then you don't need to tell the whole story. So certainly I'd be careful about including dates that go back into the last century, like mine does. So if your experience and your dates of graduation, your certifications date back a long, long way, maybe you leave out the dates. Hope that helps.
Yeah, please keep the questions coming. We'd like to make this as fluid as possible.
So that's just before we move on, are there any other questions about the resume? Because I mean, it's a huge topic that with my clients I spend a lot of time about, and we've covered it in sort of 20 minutes. So I want to make sure that if you have other questions that we get them. So
There is one more
thanks, Kenya.
in the chat. It just popped up and it's from Layla. And she asked, how do you differentiate affiliations versus community involvement? Is Fort Worth HR, for example, considered an affiliation, although you may volunteer for the organization? And if you are a member and a volunteer, do you list it in one or both areas?
I don't think that's a huge issue either way. I think you could show it under either, but show what you would show your activity level. For example, Kenya, you would show that you're on the executive committee of the Fort Worth HR. You want to show your activity in such a way that shows that you were not just doing a job, but you were committed to the profession and you showed your commitment by your involvement with your professional organization. Yeah, so good point, Leila. It could fit under in either bucket. I think you just decide where it fits best and call it what you will. Call it, yeah, community service or affiliations. Hope that answers the question. Are there any more about resume at this point?
Nothing else in the chat, Brian.
Okay. Yeah, and I said, don't forget to show military service. It's not listed here, but if you've been in the military, it's a well-regarded service that we're all grateful for, that people have had that service, and so many people have for many people it's been the foundation of their career, because they've learned so much about themselves and about leadership and working in teams, that it's certainly worth showing that, and show your rank on graduate on discharge, and that you got an honorable discharge as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the applicant tracking system. I think I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, because I guess you guys know about these things, but what is an applicant tracking system? It's the tool that so many companies now use, large and small, to sort of, they use it to organize the applicant flow. I do think my challenge for you as HR professionals, if you have impact over the applicant tracking system, the ATS, is to ask yourself, is this helping? Is this just helping us as an HR group to not go crazy, or is it helping to reinforce our company's employee brand? I think sometimes I hear horror stories from my clients about their experiences with ATSs, where I would wonder if what the CEO would think if he heard the problems that people have in submitting through an ATS. But long story short, they're here to stay. There are probably in excess of 50 different ATSs. They do similar things in that they enable you to upload your resume, but each one does it slightly differently. So you need to be able to understand that. Now, there's a tool out there called JobScan, jobscan.co, that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, particularly if you're in job search. Make use of that tool to optimize your resume against the job that you're applying for. And if you've got access to the Power Edit function of JobScan, you'll find that a very useful way to really make sure that your resume is as close as possible to the requirements of that position. So some don'ts about ATSs. Don't what we call keyword stuff. And what does that mean? Well, and I was asked this question only last week by an applicant. It's been around forever. It's the idea that I've got to get all the keywords into the resume, so I'll stuff them into a little section at the end of the resume in tiny little font, and I'll color it white, and nobody will know it's there, but it'll mean that my resume will bubble to the top. Well, don't do that, because first of all, I'd say if the keywords are important, why are you stuffing them into a section at the end of the resume? Why are they not front and center in the summary and in the experience? Secondly, if people got any sort of skill in with Word, they're going to see that there's a section at the bottom, and they're going to highlight that in black font, and they'll realize you're trying to pull one over the company. So you'll get a reputation as being dishonest. So don't do that, would be my strong recommendation. Avoid pictures on resumes, avoid graphics. You can see in the sample on the right, some little fancy little icons and things. The problem is they confuse the ATS more often than not. They don't really help you. If anything, they're going to make your resume like a mess when you try to upload it to the ATS. And make sure that your fonts you use are consistent. If you've got 6 different fonts and 4 different colors on the resume, okay, it's going to stand out, but it's going to stand out for the wrong reasons. It's not going to look good. So it's going to look like you, it's going to make it look sloppy in my view. So avoid that. Here's the big thing that I'm going to talk about that I think is sometimes overlooked. Regardless of whether you're, hang on, let me go back. Are there any questions about ATSs and an online application?
Nothing in the chat, Brian. But
Okay.
is there a desired font that you recommend people use so it doesn't
I think the most common ones, there are a couple that we will commonly use. One is Calibri, and I think the example on the screen is in Calibri. The other one is Times New Roman or similar, which is what is it? A serif font. There are a couple. Arial, Garamond. Avoid those really unusual fonts that you've got to go digging around to find because they may not be read well by the ATS. But if you use Calibri, Arial, Times New Roman or Garamond, I think you're pretty safe. Thanks, Jim. So I would argue that, and I always do when I'm talking to my clients, that whether or not you're applying for jobs, that you make sure that you also network. And we're going to talk about that. It's an essential part of any effective job search. Ask yourself this question. If I've had jobs in the past, if I'm, had some work history, how did I get those jobs? And when I ask people that question, almost always they say, well, I knew somebody, my brother-in-law's best friend worked at the company. It was a connection that got me there. And once you're in a company, how did you progress within that company? You progressed because you did a good job in one division and somebody tapped you on the shoulder and said, can you come and help us over here because you did good work there. So networking is how it goes within organizations. It's how it's going to get you to that next job, I would suggest. Employee referrals are a #1 source of hiring. We were at the HR Southwest conference last year, and I went to a session on recruitment run by a VP from LinkedIn, actually. A couple of hundred people in the room, and maybe some of you were there. And what was interesting was he asked about the use of employee referral schemes, and almost everybody in the room raised their hand to say that that was a key source of hiring. So that's a form of networking, is making use of connections. I have a client who figured out that if he saw a good job advertised, he would immediately look for somebody on LinkedIn at that company, even if they didn't know them, and would reach out and say, look, I'm about to apply for this job. Would you like to sponsor me for that? And he's had some success where people say, sure, I'm happy to pick up the $500 from the referral scheme by sponsoring you. So referral is a big part of how people get hired. And I'm sure I'm, again, preaching to the choir there. Our experience at Keystone Partners and I've worked for several career transition firms, it's a consistent number over time, is that maybe 20 or 30% of jobs are posted, are available. And that's fine. I would argue and suggest that you apply for jobs selectively when it's a good fit with your skills and your interests. Don't just apply for hundreds of jobs, using quick apply on LinkedIn. Be more selective about that. Am I interested? Am I truly interested in this job? Do I meet most of the requirements? And then go ahead. And I would say network as well, because if you can apply, okay, maybe you get through the various filters in the ATS, but if you also happen to get to know the person who's the decision maker through networking, that gives you a second chance to get selected. We find conversely that if 20 or 30% of jobs are advertised, 75 or 80% of jobs are found through networking. So it's an important part of things. I also find, though, that it's a very misunderstood term. It terrifies some people. They'll say, well, I'm an introvert. How can I possibly network? I'm not a used car salesman. I'm uncomfortable doing that. I'm comfortable bragging about myself. And I say, fine, do it your way. Find a way that fits your personality and your style. If you're an introvert, you've got a real advantage. I'll say that again. If you're an introvert, you've got a real advantage, because what do introverts not like to do? They don't like to talk a lot. What do they do instead? They listen, 2 ears, 1 mouth. What do extroverts like to do? They like to talk about themselves. So if you're an introvert, if you can at least bring yourself to have the conversation, to start the conversation and ask that other person, what do you do? What advice have you got for me? What do you know? Ask them a question to get them talking. You're going to learn something, and that's going to help you. That will be far more valuable than trying to sell yourself. Now, the interesting thing is the bottom bullet point. My experience speaks for itself. That's true, but how do you portray that experience? You portray that by your accomplishments. So let your accomplishments do the bragging for you. They're true stories. They're demonstrable. There's proof. Your references will attest to the fact that you did that. You did achieve that result, and let that accomplishment speak for you. Then you don't have to feel you're bragging. Hope that helps a little bit. So we've already given the answer to this, but what percentage of job openings are not posted online? Throw in A, B, C, or D into the chat, if you will. Seeing some nodding. What's the result? Any consensus?
I think we got a mixed bag. I think we see
Right.
a few C's. We see a few A's.
A's.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think AOC is probably makes sense in my experience. The point is, whether or not the job is posted online, the problem with being posted is that if you can find the job, so can everybody else. And I can tell you, having been a recruiter, that the majority of the people that apply for any job that I've ever posted are not qualified. So you're in competition the moment you apply. So make sure that you've got as many opportunities to be noticed if you are a qualified applicant by using your networking as well as applying online. That'd be my suggestion. So some pre-work, obviously update your resume. We've talked about that. Update your LinkedIn profile as well. Make sure that it is consistent with what's on the resume. I don't mean that it should be the same, but it should be send the same brand message. What is it that you're looking for? Who are you? What do you bring? Make sure that message is reflected in the resume and in the LinkedIn profile. And then in the 30-second commercial. We haven't talked about that today, but it's basically the statement that you make that maybe 10 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 90 seconds, depending on the situation. But it's where you explain to people what you're looking for, why you're qualified, and ask them for help. Start by creating a list of contacts. Do the research, understand who they are, the company they work for, and think about the sort of the problems that they may be having that you can help to solve. And then draft a message to send to them, whether via LinkedIn, whether through text, whether through email, or whether through picking up the phone and actually making a call. And what we talk about at Keystone a lot is networking through AIR, A-I-R. So that one thing that you're not doing so overtly in networking is asking, have you got a job for me? You ask somebody that, it's going to shut the conversation down because people are going to feel, oh, if I call them back, they're going to want me to give them a job lead and I don't have that for them. What your networking contacts have that can be valuable is AIR. And let me explain the acronym. Advice. They can give you advice about your resume, your certifications, the approach that you're taking. Some of that advice will contradict. That's fine. You've got a brain. You can work out what's important and what's not important. They might say, well, I don't like that font that you've used on your resume. That's fine. You do. So go ahead and use it. But look for the advice that's important and that is consistent from the various people you talk to. Second thing they can give you is information about industry trends, but also they've got a perspective. What's happening in the HR world in Fort Worth at the moment? What's happening in that industry, in the region? What is their perspective? And everybody's got a perspective. And they know people you don't know. So maybe after they get to know you a little bit, they're going to be willing to make a referral or give you a recommendation to somebody that you could talk to at your targeted company. Be willing to help them as well. Think of networking as a two-way relationship building exercise. It's not all about your need to get a job. If you can focus on what's happening around you, the value that you can bring, that's what's going to make a big difference. So, final pop quiz. I should use networking as a last resort during my job search. True or false? Put your answer in the chat.
That was an easy
imagine.
one, Brian. I think everybody got it right.
Well, I just think it is, yeah, it is false. I think networking is such an important part. It's how we do life. You move to a new area, you want to find a new dentist, you ask your neighbor, you ask somebody you know, somebody you trust. That's how you find the opportunity. So in summary, use some of the things that we've talked about to make sure that your resume is impactful and applicant tracking friendly. Make sure you've got an effective resume summary that establishes your brand. Do add accomplishment statements to show your value. That's, if you do nothing else, turn some of those duty statements into accomplishment statements. And build and expand your network by engaging with people who you know, to meet new people that you need to know, and then talk to them and have those networking meetings to maximize impact. That's as much as I would have to present, but I'm more than happy to try to answer some questions if there are any final questions. I'd love to hear from you if you disagree with what I had to say.
Absolutely. And the chat is open for you all to ask any questions, any final questions for Brian.
I would just add to, the whole networking strategy, what we've got about AIR. I think one thing that's also very effective is when you go into a networking situation, always ask, what can you do for them?
Yes.
And that usually tends to open up the door for them to be more receptive to helping you as well. Because networking certainly should be a two-way street.
Yeah, there's a term that's become maybe a little bit old-fashioned now, is the servant leadership. It's the idea that if I help somebody else, eventually somehow or other that's going to come around, and we're doing it because it's a good thing to do, and helping somebody else, and they will be more willing to help us. Pretty hard to network if it's just all about, I've got to get a job.
Yeah, 100%. And if networking certainly don't come naturally to a lot of people, but I would certainly encourage you guys all to sign up for the June 30th career series webinar, where we're going to have Ashley Owens, who's networking concierge, and she'll show you, give you a lot of tips on how to get out there, whether it's virtual, whether it's face-to-face. There's a lot of tips that she can share that can make you more effective at networking.
Yeah, find your own way to do it that fits your style.
Absolutely. Well, we do have a question.
Okay.
Evan,
right.
And he is asking, do you recommend having general business cards for those in between jobs? And if so, what do you recommend that we have on them?
Business cards are interesting. I think I've given out one business card in the last 2 years. But I think it's worth doing that, and you can do them very inexpensively. I would have obviously name, location, email, phone, LinkedIn URL, and what is it you're seeking? What is your brand? What is it that you bring? So you're comp and benefits leader, you're I don't know, you're a talent acquisition professional, whatever it is you bring. So yes, you could do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know that a lot of people rely on LinkedIn with the QR codes, but I somehow, I'm a little old school, and I still like to see a business card. And at night when I empty my pockets, I remember the person, because that person gave me a card. And I guess if you're also in a trade where it's like marketing or sales, it's a great way for you to kind of show how creative you are too with your business card, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how you go about your job search should reflect your skills. Sure.
Okay, that was a great question.
Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. Do we have any more questions? While we're waiting for additional questions, I just wanted to provide a bit more information. As Brian and both and Jim have stated, networking is definitely an essential process of part of the job search process. So with that being said, if you are in the HR industry and you're not a current member of Fort Worth HR, please be sure to consider joining, because we do offer many opportunities to network through specific events and professional emphasis groups. Also, our events include our monthly meetings, which happen on the third Wednesday of each month. And then other events such as this particular career series. We also have in-person networking events as well. Also, please be sure to check the career series page. I put it in the chat, but I can re-enter it for information on our next 2 sessions, which include interviewing and networking, as Jim informed you all about. We also have in September a conference coming up, which is the Strategic Mindset Conference, which happens September 23rd of 2022. And so we'll be providing more details about that on Fort Worth HR, FWHR.org. And you can find out information about that on LinkedIn if you're connected with any of our members. So please, please, please consider joining. If you're not, attend one of our meetings, continue to attend events like this. We would love to have you, and thank you for attending with us today. Brian or Jim, do you all have anything else that you would like to add? Any final parting words of wisdom?
I just put my LinkedIn URL into the chat. I'm more than happy to have anybody connect with me if they'd like to.
Okay.
And happy to help in any way if I can.
Yeah, I have no more words of wisdom other than what Brian shared. So.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they were wise words. I thank you. They were definitely helpful. I know to people here, they were helpful to me. So I thank you again for your time with us. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you. It was fun.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.